Why headphones? Why not, I guess. We've got a great panel here today. Thank you all for coming to the show. My name is Jim, and my purpose is to kick things off and introduce our esteemed panelists today. If you are interested in seeing the show again, or this seminar again, we'll be back at 1 o'clock tomorrow. Same panel, different questions.
At different time, when people are actually done with their hangovers.
Yes, they'll be ready. They'll be ready to
Oh,
roll.
way better.
Our first panelist on our far right, our far left, their far right, Alexander Rawson, owner of Play Me Records, CEO of Audeze, and I have seen their headphones out here in 4 or 5 different vendors' tables, and that probably means they're really, really good. If you are a fan of headphones, please check them out. I saw a room upstairs in the atrium, second floor in the atrium, 203. They've got the most comfortable chair known to man there.
Audio salon room.
Yeah, and you should check them out there, as well as everywhere else you see them. I think Eddie Current has them out too, and a whole bunch of people are just loving them. Okay, and then our next panelist, to his left, our right, Michael Mercer. I describe him as a hi-fi missionary.
Yes, he is.
This is the guy who has the energy to bring those people to the hobby. He's worked in the recording industry. He was a TAS setup man. He's a writer, reviewer, part-time DJ, audio enthusiast, etc., etc.
A lot of hats.
Yeah, works for Centrance, and they have some stuff going in the Crystal Foyer. Check that out. Great little desktop system. Spend some time with that if you can. And the headphones are running?
Audeze LCD3s.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. And you guys, so the Crystal Foyer.
Yes, the Hilton Crystal Foyer, literally right around the corner. We were right outside Ray Kimber's room.
Okay, and there's somebody else using this center. You guys are using this center?
Yes, we're doing the deck leader.
Okay, excellent. Okay, and then we have George Severa, all the way from Boise, Montana. Is it Boise?
No, Bozeman.
Bozeman,
Montana.
Okay, Bozeman, Montana. At least I got the state right. Vice President of Headroom. And you got to check out headphone.com if you're a headphone guy. Information, blogs, reviews, merchandise, etc., etc., etc. And they have their own stuff, and they sell other stuff too. And he comes to us from, I guess, the performance aspect of the hobby as a guitarist, singer, songwriter. Worked for Gibson Guitar for a while, but now finds himself on kind of the other end of the audio hobby. But a great collector of vinyl, jazz vinyl, 10,000, something like that. Yeah, that's quite a bit. And you are also the Crystal Foyer. Okay, and then last panelist on the end, Marvin Chen, or Marv, DIY enthusiast, headphone builder, speaker builder.
Really, right now, someone who measures a lot of headphones.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of a groundbreaking area. I mean, in the past there haven't been. It's been really hard to get this kind of data.
Yeah.
With speakers, yes, stereophile,
Yeah.
etc.
Okay, and he's got a lot of data, and you blog quite a bit, Head5.
Head5, yeah.
Okay, so check him out there and have discussions, long conversation. He's the one person on our panel who's not a vendor, so if you want to contact him later, you're going to have to do something like that, or buy him lunch at the food trucks and vend his
Nice
ear out
plug.
there.
Hey, they can buy me lunch too.
There you go. And
I would say no to food.
Marv is going to bring us today a great number of interesting charts and graphs. He's kind of a real technical guy who can take the basic data and make it into this wonderful, beautiful, understandable, comprehensible picture. And that's why we have him here today. I don't know if he's going to start off, but I guess
I could.
Okay. And, I should mention this too. We'll have Q&A at the end. But George is really interested in kind of an organic presentation. So if you guys have questions as we're going, raise your hand, shout stuff out. It's going to be really just
Let's have fun, make it interactive.
Just a quick comment from Russ Stratton. Because of the feedback issues, he recommends he set the mic level such that you should speak closely into the mic. That's
Is this close enough?
a little too much.
Oh, okay. Oh, good.
nice and close.
Oh my God, I actually sound low for the first time in my life.
We can make you lower too.
No, sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to George Severa, and he's going to be our moderator.
Absolutely.
All right,
I want
thank
to
you.
thank everybody for coming out. Thanks, Jim. We appreciate your help. And as Jim said, we'll be back tomorrow at 1 and probably doing a little bit of a different presentation. What's that? Oh, George, great. So maybe we'll have George Cardos come up here tomorrow and sit on the panel. And as you know, George is quite a genius and also good with profanity, so that should be excellent.
That's true.
Smart and original.
Yeah, awesome. One of the things that we've been doing at Hedgerow over the past few years, and some of you who may know our background, Tile, who I did the panel with last year as the objective versus subjective study, with Tile obviously taking the objective measurement. Tile is actually in a headphone meet that's going on right now in New York City, with a lot of the HeadFi contingent there, and gets to kind of show the breadth of the headphone community. So there's a lot of us here in LA, a whole chunk of us in New York right now. One of the great things about headphones, well, why headphones? The most obvious factor for me is that you can get that $10,000 level of performance with $1,000 investment. So it certainly is the bang for the buck. And not only do you not have to worry about the room acoustics, but you have that boundless sweet spot in your head. So headphones really have come a long way in, say, the past 5 or 10 years. With Alex's Odyssey line of headphones coming out in the past year or two, we've seen planar magnetic headphone development really take off in the past year and a half. Certainly Alex is at the forefront of that, but there are other makers like Hi-Fi Amp who are making some good planar magnetic headphones as well. And a lot of the headphones that we'll be talking about, you can hear them throughout the building and also on our table right outside. So we'll start with Marv. Marv is doing something that really no one else is doing, not even Tile. Tile certainly pioneered some of the headphone measurement studies. And if you come to headphone.com, you'll see tons of plot graphs for just about every single headphone we carry. Those still are carried out by Tile. It is an independent lab in Bozeman for us. So we still depend on Tile for the objective side of the equation for the measurements and all the plot graphs that we show. What Marv is doing really is taking it to a whole another level, as he kind of indicated. He's kind of got his own process, his own methodologies, and I'll let Marv kind of talk about.
How many of you guys here had the opportunity to see John Atkinson's presentation yesterday? It was rather excellent. Unfortunately, many of the concepts he had discussed, there's no way I could explain it as well as he could. So we'll go through the measurements and graphs that I have, and most of them you're going to be familiar with, frequency response, and the other one is the CSV waterfall plots that may be a little bit more tricky. And there's no way I can explain that as well as John, but we'll try to make this thing through. As George said, I guess the reason we have this panel here is why headphones. I got into them because after the birth of my second kid, my wife wouldn't let me stay up, at 2 a.m. It's that we're all audiophiles here, and we all know what happens with the power at 2 a.m. and your system sounds really great, and no more of that. So started getting the headphones, and the first issue I ran into is why do all these headphones suck, or how can I find something that's really good, or I went on HeadFi, hey, how does this sound? It was just really hard to communicate how a headphone would sound. There's no reference, something that may sound good to someone may not sound good to someone else. So that's really when I embarked on trying to get measurements, making meaningful measurements. Tile and Hedgerow back then. A lot of us were referring to the Hedgerow frequency response graphs, and that's one data point. But I wanted to see more, and also I wanted to hear more, because as a DIY speaker builder, I certainly knew what a lot of issues that we'd run into. Mainly, the thing that I heard the most, that really hurt my ears the most, was resonances and ringing. And are there any folks here who are into the single driver type speakers, high efficiency? Exactly, and there are challenges there with the full range drivers. There's ringing. The higher quality units typically don't have that, but there are also advantages to not having a crossover. And as George, you mentioned this, headphones really give you a very intimate experience. The level of non-linear distortion is very, very low. You put on some of these top quality headphones and you're like, wow, you're just getting blasted with, not necessarily blasted, but there's all this detail, all this information that's missing. You could walk around the high-end rooms here, these $100,000 speakers, and you may not necessarily hear that with the best, like a $15,000 headphone setup. I know it's rather crazy, but you know, some of these.
Or you maybe that's where the room really kind of becomes a huge part of the equation.
Exactly.
That room factor becomes non-existent.
You don't hear those. I mean, there are a lot of great speakers here, but you know, one thing I noted is that the rooms are too small. You hear that 60 hertz room resonance, and it's boom. It's like, oh, where did that come from? So there's none of that, and so I'm walking around here. I'm really struggling, and ideally, I mean, most of us, we don't have these big gigantic rooms, and headphones are a good way to really hear what's on that recording without the interference from the room. But anyways, as I mentioned right now, where are we at in terms of headphones? And I feel we're in the late 70s, early 80s in terms of where speakers were, and that's why I threw this thing up here with the scene in Boogie Nights, but saying, hey, look, maybe 3 or 4 more quads per channel. We're getting there. There are a lot of companies right now. Sennheiser's done some good work. Odyssey has really made a great headphone, and we'll start seeing what I'm talking about when we get to these measurements. That's a speaker I wanted 30 years ago. Probably had the opportunity to hear it 4 years ago. We're going to play the guess the headphone game. I don't know.
Yeah. We should mention before we get going that we're going to have a guess the headphone game. So if anybody can guess from the graph which headphone it is, we have freebie prizes. We have some headphone amps and some bags to give away to your incredible intelligence, because I'm not sure if you can guess. But
This particular headphone is a closed headphone. I'll give hints and see if anyone can guess. I really doubt it, because we got some serious headphone fanatics here, geeks here. This is a CSD plot. It does not cover the low frequencies. It only covers the frequencies from 500 hertz up.
now, is that purposeful? Why would you do the 1.5?
There's not very much meaningful information below 500 hertz for headphones. It's just a matter of interactions with the cups.
What coupler are you using? Well, let's get to the starting.
Oh, you want to? Okay.
That's key.
I'm actually not using a dummy head. The reason is I actually did try a dummy head, and there's some issues with that. With dummy heads, you've got the ears.
And you have to have, there are many different ones.
Yeah, and then you've got, the really good ones have the tubes in them, and those create specific resonances that don't necessarily represent what we hear. If I were to do a CSD measurement with one of those couplers, there'd be all sorts of resonances that are inherent to the human auditory system, which I feel the brain filters out. So what I actually did was I built a custom coupler. I'll let you know more about the details if you're interested, but I don't want to sidetrack it too much. But essentially what it does is it tries to minimize the effects of the ear, the canal, while at the same time trying to be realistic of what we actually hear.
So I'm still having difficulty understanding why 500 below cycles is not relevant.
That's a good question. I'll bring up some plots tomorrow to show why. They just it's not so relevant. They just don't tend to work well. The other reason technically is to take these plots. They're always reflections when I'm playing these impulses or frequency sweeps, whatever I use. And there's a need to minimize reflections because the human brain is very, very good at filtering them out. Now, there's some math behind it. And so basically what I'll do is I'll gauge the measured response, and by gating it, because low frequencies have a very long wavelength, they're not going to be covered. And essentially they get filtered out of the measurement. But I'll bring some examples tomorrow, and be able to answer that question. It's better to show rather than to try to explain.
So can you tell us a little bit about what we're looking at here in terms of the color hues and radiation?
Well, at the very left, it's 200. That's 200 hertz, and it's going up to 20 kilohertz. In terms of the gradations, a good way to think of this is sort of a frequency response over time. It's not exactly like that, essentially, if this were a perfect headphone, at the very back, you would see a wall, and then a notch later, it would just drop to zero.
So it's a straight line.
It would just be a wall. It was basically a wall like that. And you know, any ridges, any extra information, that's stored energy. And with the measurement system that I've developed, it tends to focus more on the driver rather than the enclosure. There are some enclosure effects.
Is it accurate to call those residents that we're looking at?
Yes, especially if they're ridges. For this particular headphone, and I don't think anyone's going to guess it, this is the frequency response for the headphone. It's not very good. It's extremely bassy, and it's got a lot of high treble energy.
That's this monster beat.
I've got Monster, and it looks, well, it looks worse than that. But a lot of hobbyists enjoy this headphone because it sounds like a subwoofer attached to your ear, and it's, you know, it's really sparkly up top, and the mid-range is, yeah, rather sucked out. You know, going back to that, I'll let you know which one it is. This is a Denon D7000. It's a closed headphone.
And it is definitely regarded as one of the top closed cans. There's a lot of aficionados who
A lot of folks like it.
I like that.
I actually owned a little brother to this headphone, the D5000, and where I really had issue was the high frequencies right there at 9K. Now that's a really sharp bridge there, and the fact that it's really thin, it's going to hurt. I mean, it hurt my ears, and I think most of the folks here who are used to speakers, it's going to hurt your ears too.
To be clear, what
No,
we're
not
talking
mine.
about is this little ridge
When I
right
run it
here.
with a tube heading. No, when I run it with a tube heading. I actually like, I enjoy it.
Now, as you're subjectively evaluating headphones, you pick this one, you said you love it, and then out over time, you said, it's not so good.
This is exactly what.
Is there a checklist, you say, okay, I'm gonna listen to this recording and it has this information, high frequency information. I'm gonna listen to this recording, it has this low frequency information. I'm gonna listen to this recording, it has female vocals or whatever on it. Do you have sort of like a checklist? So when you go in and say, I've got to put these cans on, and I'm gonna start with this, go through this checklist.
I do have a set of 10 reference recordings which I listen to before I take these measurements, and I like to look at my notes just to make sure that, you know, these measurements are reflective of what I hear and correlate.
I guess it's the same conundrum you have when you're dealing with speakers, you know, measurements versus your own subjective perception of whether that equates to good sound or not. So, I imagine you measure a million headphones. So I imagine there's certain measurements that you prefer auditorily, you know, some things that you'll put up with, you know, as opposed to, you know, other. I mean, I guess my question is, when you're evaluating headphones, are you looking at your measurements first?
No.
Yeah. So you're putting them on and say, I like these, and then you go the other way around and say, well, how these measure ones I like this.
Exactly, and over time, you know, I started finding patterns, things that would bother me and things that wouldn't. You know, this headphone has a pattern that bothers me. It may not bother other folks. Or again, you know, put a nice cube amp to take the edge off. And,
Yeah, I love
you
it.
know,
Throw in an audio note, I'm gonna have.
but you know, where I come from is I'm a speaker guy, and I'm also a DIY speaker builder, and something like that is completely unacceptable.
Oh, that's interesting, because I come from the speaker world, and yeah, like I said, it is all subjective, like you said, it really is. I mean, aside from the measurement aspect.
But I'll, you know,
But I love
I'll-
someone else being.
I'll guarantee you, you know, if Stereophile ever saw a speaker measure like that, it's, you know, I'd like to see some comments. Let's go into the next one here. I don't think anyone's going to be able to guess this one either. This is one of my favorite headphones. It's very bright, and it's an open headphone. Anyone can guess. You know, pretty good. That's actually an HD 800.
Okay, so it wasn't far.
Yeah, it's an open headphone, very clean. It's got a minor resonance there, broad resonance around 5-6K. You know, some folks have mentioned you know, snare drums can sound a little bit hard, but overall it's pretty good. It's a little bit recessed. You know, as you head up toward the treble.
In that blue between 500 and 1K, can you explain what's going on there?
You know, that, a lot of those, a lot of the area there, that's one of the mentions one of the reasons I cut that area off. Those tend to be effects from the enclosures. And it's, that data really is not very air cut.
So is that mechanical vibration?
Not mechanical resonances within the air cut.
Oh, you said this is an open back.
Yeah. and I
Yeah,
think
it is an open back, but take a look at that. That's a closed headphone. So you see more of that effect. And these measurements tend to go down much farther, minus 36, that's the floor decibels down. Definitely a little bit more than what you see in the stereophile magazines, because I'm going pretty deep to see what the behavior is.
Now, how does that one, the 800 compare with the 600? Did you measurements on the 600?
I do have 600s, I don't have them here.
Just generally?
Generally what you'd see with the 600s is, there's a lot of energy with the HD 800s from 5K up. The 600s tend to be, actually, you know what, I don't have the 600s, but I have measurements for the 650s, which are different.
Which are different, yeah.
Yeah, which are different.
Do you have a 700 by any chance?
I actually do have the 700s. I don't know. We'll see those. We'll see those. I just got them in. Move to the next one here. This is that little dip there. That's a measurement artifact. These things happen sometimes. This is this is a headphone that has very, very good bass extension. It's laid back towards the treble on purpose. The designer of this headphone, I assume, probably wanted to create a more speaker-like presentation because once you got speakers in the room and you angle them away, they're not blasting in your ears. Can anyone guess what this might be?
Open or closed?
It's an open headphone. It's very clean, very, very clean. There's a little bit of hash there around 8, 9K. It's probably. No, this is Odyssey LCD2. It's great. I know you guys.
Yeah, we don't take measurements the same way, so it's a little different the way you do than most people.
My question is on that, oh, sorry.
Martin, on the chart, we've got a red and a green line. We have the other one, the two single lines. Green is and red is?
Left and right.
Okay, and so you've got that dip, you said it's an artifact, so you can disregard that.
Disregard that.
Okay.
Move the headphone a centimeter and it goes away.
Move the millimeter, a millimeter, and it goes away, or even half a millimeter. It's just the nature of measurements. I think that was caused by I played tone sweeps and I just couldn't hear it because I can still hear up to around 12K, hopefully, and I can still hear it. And, I think it was a combing effect from the metal cage or something, and you move that with a microphone, and you know how that goes.
So how close should the left and right channels match?
With headphones, my measurement system, I wouldn't give it. I'd give it plus minus one. It's just sometimes I'm not too precise with that. Just take it with a grain of salt. But generally, I find with headphones, if you're within plus minus one, you're not going to notice. It's really, really hard to notice. So you got these headphones on, and
Looks like you're plus or minus 4 dB apart between the two channels there. And the low frequencies.
yeah, the low frequencies when you're reading from around 500 hertz, a little bit of a gap there. Let's move on. This one, this is a very well-known headphone. It's very popular, even right now, but this was a couple of years ago. Open headphone. Really, really fun. It's got a little bit of mid-bass, mid-bass hump. Very interesting mid-range. I guess guitar players or folks who really like the guitar sound love this headphone.
I assume it's an AKG or something?
Actually, it's a Grado RS1.
I was just gonna say Grado. First one I would have got right. I've been listening to him.
That's a pretty significant. What are we showing there in that artifact around 4.5?
Which one is it, Mark?
RS1. Yeah, this, when I started out, I had the RS1s, but I don't think I had this particular model. When I had the RS1s, it was in 1998, and back then, I believe, it had the pink drivers or something, which are based a little bit closer to the Joe Grado models, which were much more neutral. Right? These probably can last a couple minutes before I really need to take them out. But they're a fun headphone, and a lot of guys like them. A lot of guys got their start with the Grados. I mean, what they do really well. I'm not too sure what they do well.
Well, is there immediacy and that kind of liveliness reflected in the graphs typically?
I should have brought the impulse response for this. It's a very lively, very fun headphone. Very forward.
No.
By any chance, did you do any of the old style, like the old Cons headphones?
I've got measurements for an old cost electrostatic. I can bring that tomorrow. And that measures very well.
So in terms of using the graphs to choose a headphone, is there a way to kind of incorporate graphs into your headphone selection process?
Well, I like things that look like that. The LCD2, and I like things that look like that. The HD800, they're just much cleaner. They have frequency response aberrations. And again, as I mentioned, going back to that first slide, we're in the early stages of headphone development. I hope to see more better linear distortion that is flatter frequency response, and as I said, nonlinear distortion is very good, and a lot better control with the resonances, the ringing. These two are very good examples. I mean, they're my two favorite dynamic headphones right now, and for a good reason.
So going back to your earlier statement, would it be accurate to say that a perfectly neutral headphone, if that were to exist, would be that wall that you described?
Well, I mean, in terms would be a wall, and some people may not like perfectly neutral. Most speakers tend to be slightly dark when you measure them.
I have a question. It seems to be like, you said headphones are in their infancy, so is headphone measurement.
Exactly.
So the better you get, as soon as you start to account for all the resonances, that are not inherent in the headphone itself, but the acoustic feel that you're measuring, these will be a lot more aligned better with, when you look at measurement on a graph and pick a headphone, because right now you're still developing. My question is for Alex, as a manufacturer, you said you don't measure like this, you measure a different way.
We measure with a dummy head. We also then, before we install the driver into the headphone, because once you install the driver and you put that cup on your ear, it all goes away. So we measure, before we put the driver into the cup, we measure an IEC baffle to make sure our QC is correct and everything's within our tolerances. Once that passes, then it goes into the cup and is installed.
But when you're voicing, like any speaker designer, you're voicing about certain things that you probably respond to, or that you think that your consumer's going to respond to.
I think Alex probably has a good insight there because he's also a speaker builder. And obviously the Odyssey folks, they kind of got their start designing line arrays and speakers. So I know there's an intersection for Odyssey between speaker development and headphone development. And I know there's quite different measurement techniques for both, or you guys use kind of similar approaches?
It's very similar. It is. It's just that once it goes into that cup and it gets onto that dummy head, it's very difficult to see what's going to happen because even the slightest reposition, you're going to get different results. Yeah, and then everybody's ears here are shaped differently.
Are you looking for certain, because everything else we design is a trade-off, right? So, what do you like when you're designing your ODEs as far as tonality, as far as imaging, as far as, but that's basically your cooking.
For us, we're looking to make the fastest driver that we possibly can.
So I think graphs for consumer benefit when you're looking at headphones is, you can use them to check whether or not you like, that there was a justification for you liking something, but still, you put them on your head and listen around.
I was going to say, that's how I always judge. I put them on my head, I throw on a recording that I know, and if I get lost in the music and forget even the headphone I'm listening to, then I know I love it.
Also for us, I think we're the only manufacturer that sends an individual graph with each headphone that is made by us. For me, there have been many times where I was like, why are we doing this? Can we just stop this? Because it takes a lot of time to actually do that, to send each measurement with the headphone, print the measurement, put it in there, line it up with the serial number. It's,
So I get this measurement in the phone that it's purchased from,
yep,
and I'm Joe Consumer. What do I look for?
it's a
What do I look
reference. It's just a graphical reference of what that driver did as it was attached to a dummy head.
for? Okay, so if I say, I'm listening to your phone, I just got it in the mail kind of thing, that's cheap. One channel is off, you know. Do I just send it back to you and say, okay, you'll look at the graph and you'll compare it and say?
I won't look at the graph. We'll just take them apart, we'll remeasure the driver, and then we'll make sure you're happy. That's really our goal.
Do you measure the driver on the fixture or separate?
Both. So before it gets installed,
The relay is separate.
yes.
So if you got a dummy head on yourself.
Can't say that because every time you reposition the headphones on the dummy head, it changes.
Yeah, but you can lock the position. You can mark and lock the position.
Doesn't help.
Does that help?
No.
How come?
There's too many tiny variables.
Yeah.
Tiny, yeah.
Well, you'd be amazed how sensitive that stuff is.
I will say in terms of the headphone measurements that we do with Tile, those are averages. So in essence, Tile will take position 1, position 2,
Okay.
4, and 5, average them together. And those are the FR specs that you see at headphone.com. So typically there's 4 to 6 positions being averaged together in some of those FR specs that we show. That again is not perhaps the ultimate way to do it, because you certainly are taking a lot of those anomalies that you're seeing there and kind of averaging them together. But in terms of maybe being the most even keel way to do it, I think Tom feels that's his approach.
Well, like Alex says, I mean, if you think rooms sound different, variables in the inside of your ear canal.
Everybody.
The size of your eardrum,
Yeah.
so the canal, is just like, you know, when you go and try earbuds on, everybody has to change it because you can't get them to fit, because your ears are all different.
Yeah, it took me forever to find a great seal for my wife. It ended up being the Etymotic. She has very narrow ear connection. And to her, it's like she could be working and she literally can't hear me. I walk right up to her. I'm like, Alex.
Well,
Can't hear
the interesting
anything. It
thing
took
we
me
find
years to find that.
a lot of folks will have one tip tight and one tip soft. In one ear, a completely different tip than the other. And that's
You might just be asking.
that's highly
That could be
likely.
true, but 15 years. Yeah.
Sir?
Well, talk, you've been mentioning how the actual enclosure affects what happens to the driver and where it's on, your head and so on. How much research actually goes into the enclosure development itself in order to try to get some kind of standardization, to get some outcome that you want?
For us, it took about 3 years to get the pad the way that we like it. So to fit over the ear, to have a certain shape that's going to project the sound into the ears, I mean, it took a few years for us. But it really does, the shape of a pad on a headphone is really going to affect the way it sounds. Yeah, it's huge. And even the foam that's used inside there, I mean, we spent a lot of money and time researching the foam that we would use to get the right amount of push on the face.
So, given that, then basically the measurement standards are not there yet to deal with such variables as enclosures.
For me personally, I don't put my money on the measurements, even though I do believe in measurements in an IEC baffle. So as the driver is standalone and you're putting a mic up against it, I do believe in those measurements. Because those you can get pretty standard, you know, you can see a lot less variation in your measurements.
And interestingly enough, there are headphone manufacturers, Credo in particular, who do not take any measurements. They do their headphone tuning strictly by ear, and once they have the sound that John Grado and his team like, that's it. They do not do any measurements. In fact, typically, the measurements that you see for Grado at headphone.com are really one of the only measurements of Grado headphones that are out there. And it's not because John is anti-measurement necessarily, he just doesn't think that they really impact what he does in his shop. Anyone who's visited Grado in Brooklyn, it's definitely a home, you know, considering the size of that brand, it's a homespun operation for sure.
Very well done.
It's very well done, certainly, but he's definitely a manufacturer with a very strong reach of measurements.
Yeah, you've kind of opened the door here as to what manufacturers are making in terms of how they sound as opposed to measurements, and I get what you're doing here, but if I can just take maybe 2 or 3 minutes here. If you had $500 only to spend on headphones, what would each one of you purchase and why?
Alex, you want something?
I'd probably try and find a used LCD too. To be honest.
You go for more.
I think that was way more than $500.
I'm not just saying this as a cop-out, but myself as well, you know, because, yeah, just change the way.
I don't know. I really don't know.
Is that
Or
too,
maybe I
is
try
that
to
too
get,
little?
maybe
then?
I try to get my father's stats for 500, but it'll never happen.
Well, for me, if you go a little bit over 500 at $699, there's a great planar magnetic made by Hi-Fi Man called the HD 500. Selling a very good headphone in that planar magnetic style. And Hi-Fi Man also makes some other headphones that are good as well, but I'd say the HD 500 is probably the biggest bang for the buck.
George, gotta say, I also want to say, like, for me, it's just like anything else. Like I came up in the visceral, high-end experience, where I like music to actually touch me. I like to make that that emotional connection. I got indoctrinated into headphones by being a DJ. And so for me, all the variables matter, meaning it's hard for me to really answer you honestly. It's like someone asking me, what's the best amp for $500? Well, there's tons of variables that go into that. So if someone asked me, what would you recommend at $500? The first thing I would ask them is, what style of music do you love? What can you not live without? What are you listening to often? What head amp are you going to be using? All these other variables, and then I approach that. So considering my gear that I have at home that I use, it would be a pair of those, but it's all so I take all those things into consideration.
$500, the HD 500. I agree with George. I mean, it's a little bit more. Actually, what about the HD 400? That's
You may also need an amp for those though as well, right?
I love the 490s, and everyone hates it.
ESP 950.
I actually liked the Denon T2000 for $349 and the Steel back can has been discontinued, but that was an interesting headphone with certain recordings that had a certain synergy with others, perhaps not so much. But that's been a major question we get at Headroom every day. People will call us and go, hey, what's the best headphone? From that point on, you really have to kind of break it down, and just like these guys are saying, you have to kind of ask folks where they're coming from. Musical taste is certainly big, but so is, where you're listening. Are you on the move? Are you listening music? Is it something that, how are you an analytical listener? Are you maybe more a guy that just wants a 2-beat kind of sound? We can kind of dial you in from those perspectives, but boy, what's the best headphone? That's always the tough question to answer.
Also, what are you plugging it into?
Oh, right, yeah.
Absolutely.
Sir? I'm sorry.
Yeah, when we consumers listen to, say, a dozen brands in a row, is there a psychoacoustic phenomenon where your brain starts to compare them? Then you go back and listen to the first one again, and it kind of sounds different than the first time or similar to the others. Is your brain reinterpreting and comparing them? And if I can give an analogy visually, I know that when you see a color, like green, and then you line up 20 different greens, your brain is not really like a camera. It interprets what shade it thinks it should be, and then compares it to how accurate it is.
Sure.
And will actually change your perception of what you think you see to what it really is. And is there an acoustic equivalent to that?
I would say there certainly is something along those lines, and when you listen to a lot of headphones in a row, they can tend to have, I'm not sure how long folks' audio memory really is. Some people argue it's a millisecond or two, other folks will tell you it's a week. So it's always hard to do that A-B comparison and have it really be an honest A-B comparison. We try to frame it as such in audio. Hey, listen to this headphone, listen to this headphone. But indicators are different. Volume settings are so key for that because it's a subjective experience. Obviously, if you have a headphone that's louder than the other, your brain's going to tell you, oh, that's the better. So those A/B comparisons can certainly be a little bit tricky, whether you come out to the booth and listen to 10 headphones in a row, or even 2. So I think it's the same kind of for speakers.
Yes,
It's a
and
really-
also the mood you're in.
Yes.
You got the same acoustic effect, you know, it changes from day to day. You know?
It's a great question. It's like going to Best Buy and trying to pick out a TV.
Yeah,
It's like 50 TVs, you're like, that's the one.
I just had that
When
experience.
they're all of them again, you're like, that's not the one.
I just finally said, I love that box.
So,
I have a question about, you guys, I mean, take a, that we're advancing, headphone technology, and you sort of talk about how you align the enclosures. Now we have in-ear molded, headphones. Do you envision a time where you could have, bespoke enclosures, where they do a measurement, some kind of measurement of your ears, and then the manufacturer can, give you, an enclosure that would perfectly fit your user. So I have problems, wearing headphones that are certain pressure points, so I owned a pair that was fantastic, sounding, but it was only fantastic sounding until I took them off and hurt. So do you see somewhere down the line, maybe that would be an advancement?
I see exactly what you're talking about, thinking about for years now, is the personalized measurements and graphs for each user, as well as potentially taking 3D models of their actual side of their face to make real custom headphones, just like they do with the molds, except for your face. But yeah, it's in the works actually.
Okay. I hope you patent it.
But then again, you would think you were going to have little custom molded ones for me, you're going to have completely different measurements than the custom molded one for this capsule. So to almost, since you don't want to say, well, we're just going to throw those measurements out the window, but it's kind of like, geez, where do I go? I guess it's still better than slapping an artist's name on it and say, you can be a doctor.
Who? Doing what?
With the IEMs, we bought Ultimate Ears. They provide a custom fit.
Jerry's already.
And, I believe they just came out, they've announced some new service where, you can actually walk into their offices and they're going to customize the frequency response to how you would like it. It's really more tailored for us studio engineers.
is their office here in Irvine?
Yeah, right here.
Wow.
So George, it's about 11:46. I don't know if you guys want to do vendor price breaks and whatnot.
Do that.
Wrap up.
Sure. We can definitely do a wrap up. Yes, sir.
Do you find that with headphones, because you guys probably have a lot of experience listening to different headphones, you find like headphones are designed sometimes for a particular market? Or people, let's say, my comparison would be like American sounding loudspeaker as compared to like European, preference and sound.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you just, made reference to a certain big company that attached a big artist to it, and they sold a ton of headphones. Well, when I got a pair of those to review, when I listened to them, were they as good as my reference headphones? They're far from it. But I said, look, they looked at their audience and what their audience is listening to, and no one can deny that we can all poo-poo that big brand, but they looked at their audience. They knew what their audience wanted. They knew that they were driving around in cars bumping bass that would rattle, my Mini behind them. But, and it worked, for good or bad. It's a business.
It was totally for good.
Right.
Seriously, guys, you can all make great concert thing, but we wouldn't be sitting here with all these other headphone manufacturers if they hadn't exploded.
And you know what, Andy, when I reviewed the solos, you and I laughed, I said that my favorite feature was the control talks, and now I use them as a headset. But I said, you know what, in my review I said, I'd love to tell you I hate these headphones. I would love to, because now I'm going to hear from all my audio friends that I'm nuts. But I'm going to tell you that they were designed for a specific audience, and they work for that audience, and you can't deny that because of the sales. And you're right. Wasn't that phenomenon? I
Just so you guys know.
wouldn't have found this T-shirt at Disneyland.
Well, it was the really good thing that happened, not to take up the time, is Dre being as important to his demographic as he is. And you can argue whether or not rap is vital or whatever, but all music's vital. If it makes anybody smile, it's vital.
That's right.
Okay?
And just so you guys know, Andy actually.
He turned these kids on to better sound than the white earbuds.
Yeah.
My son now stole my on his ease. He started out with Beats because he thought they were cool.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden he's going, what's better? So I like growing audiophiles.
Yeah.
And
I've done it for
hopefully
years.
that grows, you know.
Here, here.
we Recover whatever investment.
And just so you guys know, Andy is actually the guy responsible for infiltrating the beats into the consciousness of North America.
One.
Yes.
Thank you
Going
for
back,
that.
going back to that question, I do feel the manufacturers do, depending on where they're based, they do have a certain sound. It's really interesting because, going back to the Sennheiser HD 800s, Sennheiser's a German company, and most of my European friends, they don't listen to what most Americans do, classical. And if you've got classical music, you want to bump up that, if you bump up that treble a little bit, it has a pretty good effect. There's not very much information up there in terms with the actual instruments, violins, and it sounds good. It just lets you hear the harmonics, gives you at least the sense of more detail, more air. And what's interesting is, Alex Odyssey, this is an American company. What do we like? Let's get some bass. Not just treble. We want some bass. So, I do feel there's a little bit of that. And what's really interesting is you go back to the HD 800 when it was being developed. I heard rumors, hey, are you guys going to voice this differently? Are you going to voice it to the European market? Or when you bring this over to the U.S., are you going to voice it for the U.S. market? And in the end, they decided not to. And with many of the headphone fanatics, I think there was a little bit bummed out to the fact that the HD 800 wasn't voiced a little bit more to what Americans would like.
Sir, do you have any status plots of the latest version of Stax headphones?
I actually do have all the Stax headphone measurements. This one in particular is the SR007 Mark 2.1. I think you can hear that at it's a little bit. It's definitely a very laid-back headphone. You can see the lower treble, upper mids are recessed very well. It performs very, very well. The 1K aberrations there, those are definitely caused by the air pads in the air cup. Sir?
It seems like when you listen to headphones, sometimes you hear more detail that you've never heard through speakers.
Absolutely.
Now, is that real, or is it a perception?
Well, it's the resolution of the headphones. You really, in essence, with certain great headphones, you are at that mastering or recording session almost. It's as close as you can get to being inside the music in some of these top cans. So it's an immediate sound, and I think it is a more detailed and more resolved with the top headphones. I mean, like I was saying before, those $1,500 Sennheiser HD 800s, in order to get that level of speaker performance, you will probably be in that 15 to 20 grand terrain, if not more. So again, the bang for the buck there is significant.
Well, is a good speaker reproducing that it's getting lost in the room?
Well, it's part of it. It's part of it. But I'll tell you, what's interesting is, to your question, as a music reviewer, for years, I just relied on my reference system. I mean, my speaker is my big system. And I noticed recently, thanks to Alex, and a few others who have really taken my headphone experience to another level, that when I listen to an album in my reference system, obviously I get this emotional connection, which is the most important thing for me. What I want for any system to do, headphone or hi-fi, is to just get the hell out of its own way and connect me to the music. But I found now that when I listen to an album in my system, and then when I listen to certain albums on headphones, it's almost like I can tell when some records are mixed for headphone listeners, because there's so much transient stuff going on that even though I have a very resolving system, and I'm just saying I do, it's almost like now when I review music, I use both, where before I just used the reference system.
What if you had to make a choice yourself, speakers or headphones from now on? Just personally.
Personally, to be honest, at this point, it's really hard to answer that, but because I'm still of the vein of music, to me is a visceral experience, meaning I love having the music hit me. And I love experiencing that because that's how I connect emotionally. Now with headphones, I can connect emotionally, but I still prefer that visceral experience. But some of these better headphones now are giving me that same experience, which actually blows my mind because I never thought I could get there with a headphone, honestly. I mean, now what I'm hearing with his and a decent head amp, that triple stack, it's blowing my mind. So it's getting closer. Right now, I prefer, the reference system, but who knows?
So, last question.
You have to consider that with headphones, you're always in the sweet spot.
Yep.
When you listen to speakers, you have to be in the sweet spot to hear.
Absolutely.
the nicer sound.
And the great thing about your head
If
is,
you move a little bit, then you're out.
Exactly.
That's the main
and,
difference.
you always want wearing your head, so it's always a sweet spot. And to
I'll
me,
bring some measurements tomorrow between speaker drivers and headphones. Headphones just have an amazingly low amount of nonlinear distortion. They're just so clean. In terms of being able to capture that low-level information, it's just all there. Speakers, the other issue with speakers is they're designed to really move a lot more air. And when you're comparing miniature devices that are much smaller transducers that are up here, there's definitely advantages in terms of the amount of air that needs to be moved to distortion.
all right, well, thanks everybody for coming. It was really a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll be doing it again between 1 and 2 p.m. tomorrow, and we'll have, all kinds of different questions and hopefully a little bit of a further emphasis on
We want to, Alex, you want to say?
And Alex doesn't have a little sales special he wants to mention?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a slight show special. If you visit our booth, we're giving $300 off the LCD2 and $150 off the LCD. $300 off the LCD3 and $150 off the LCD2.
And at Centrance, our DAC board, we're giving $100 off for the show special. So stop on by.
Good stuff. Thanks again, guys, and we'll see you tomorrow at 1 p.m.